Admiral, Elder, my name is Fugan. Oh, I thought we were going by titles. No, I was calling you Admiral because it's your name, apparently. Then I guess my full name must be Admiral. What a great example of nominative determinism. Have you met my friend Commander? Let me guess, he's a chef? Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, Monster Hunter games are amazing, and you don't need me to tell you that, of course, but as far as the series go, the last two entries have been the most popular by far, being World in its Iceborne expansion, and now Rise in its Sunbreak expansion. These games have increased the size of the player base for the franchise a ridiculous amount, and there are a ton of reasons that each of these games is fantastic. However, as we all know quite well, they are surprisingly different from each other in a lot of ways. I fully believe that each of these games absolutely nailed some aspects of hunting monsters in a wider sense. Some of these aspects are nailed by both games, but some things are just done better in one than the other. Of course, there will be a time and place to talk about what Sunbreak did better than Iceborne, but that's not today. Today I'll be talking about 10 things I believe that Iceborne did notably better than Sunbreak has. Things that I believe made it such a great Monster Hunter game, that weren't kept and replicated in the same way for the next game in the series. Before we even get started on the proper list itself, the most obvious thing to say here is the graphics. Considering that Rise was initially created for the Nintendo Switch alone with that system's hardware in mind, it looks great, but it is an undeniable fact that Iceborne is just absolutely gorgeous. Not by any specific standards, not with any asterisks like being made for the Switch, it's just a beautiful game, top to bottom. That said, this is due very heavily to the difference of systems the games were made for, so it felt unfair to include that on the list proper, but it definitely needed some sort of acknowledgement. Graphics don't make a game good or bad, but they are definitely a noteworthy part of the experience. First proper one on the list then, the story. Now I don't think that Rise or Sunbreak had a bad story by any means, but there was a certain way that World managed to tie everything together that was just lovely. When I say the story, I don't mean the literal conversations between characters and the cutscenes, I mean more the world building itself, the meaning of the places that we hunted within. The biggest example that I can think of being the maps in the game itself. In Rise and Sunbreak, the maps just sort of exist. They are what they are, we visit them and we fight environmentally appropriate monsters, but anyone who remembers their initial journey through Monster Hunter World will be able to gush about that first time you saw the Coral Highlands. It didn't just pop up as a location of a quest, then you load in and then there's a little cutscene that plays. There was an actual in-game story moment. After you finish the first Zora Magdaros quest, you'll walk up through the zone that it took place in until you exit and find the absolutely mystifying map that looks like an underwater utopia without the water. There is just something so special about this. And then later on, we find out about the Rotten Vale, which is located beneath the Coral Highlands, and there's this whole mystery within the story that explains the synergy between these two regions. How the Rotten Vale is so gross and decaying because it is a place that calls dying monsters to go and rest there in their final moments. It is a pile of corpses because it is simply a monster graveyard, and it is simply a result of this that the Coral Highlands can even exist. A land of luscious beauty only possible due to the excess of nutrients in the rotting graveyard directly below it. All of the life growing as a result of all of the death. There's just something so whimsical about all of it, and I adore this. Second then, tracking the monsters. This whole system is explained away in Rise and Sunbreak through the Kohoots scouting above and spotting the monsters, but there was definitely a certain magic in Iceborne to starting at a camp, going around and collecting tracks, looking at the corpses that a monster had eaten, things like that, and using all of this to find where it is, one step at a time, following the tracks like some sort of detective. Zoinks! Of course, once you had played the game for hundreds of hours, the system got a touch stale, having to find the monsters on every single quest, but it also added a ton of immersion to the game. Rise is a game about getting to the hunt as quickly as possible and keeping you in the action as much as you can be. It's a very streamlined Monster Hunter experience created for a portable system. It's almost arcade-like, and it's awesome in its own way, but personally I just think that the tracking system in World helped give a ton of life to that game. Then we come to the third entry, the Gathering Hub. Specifically, the Gathering Hub being able to fit 16 people. Don't get me wrong, it's cool that even the base village in Rise can have your friends running around it, but this is capped at a 4-player maximum, and there was absolutely something special about it being in a 16-player Gathering Hub in Iceborne. It made the area feel absolutely alive, the air electric with the will to hunt when you had it absolutely full of other hunters in their own unique gear, their own unique looks. It was lovely. It may be a somewhat small thing in the grand scheme of things, but it really helped make the world feel like it was bigger than just you. Fourthly then, let's talk about mounting. This is one system that has significantly changed between Iceborne and Sunbreak, and I am very split on it. I love the general concept of wyvern riding. I think it is fun, but it is definitely a bit obnoxious to happen the amount that it does in my mind. One thing that I really like that Sunbreak did did was the Marionette Spider, which reuses the concept of the flint shot from the Clutch Claw from Iceborne, but in a way that makes it happen much rarer. It makes it much less annoying, it makes it stop being a required thing you have to do every couple of minutes, and starts just being a neat thing that happens a couple of times at most during a quest. Wyvern riding, to me, should not have full-on replaced the old mounting system. It should have been a separate thing entirely that can happen once or twice per quest through some sort of endemic life, or at least only within certain zones. I think it's fun, but having recently explored Iceborne some more once again, I just really prefer the old mounting system if I have to choose between the two. It is fun to grapple a monster's back as it tries to shake you off. Having to dodge around or hold tightly when it attacks, other players can still hunt it like normal while it happens, as opposed to Wyvern riding just making the hunters have to wait around until it's done, and then at the end you get a knockdown. It is simple but fun and relatively believable, whereas honestly Wyvern riding is just a little bit crazy when you get down to it. You tie a bunch of strings to a monster and then it's fully under your control?
Break them. Control them.
Fifth up today, Endemic Life, by which I mean specifically all the little creatures running around the place, the pilot hares, the wigglers, just popping up in various locales that suit their ecology, and then you can catch them with a net, or just let them run around doing their own thing for the entire quest. They are locked to their own zones, and I enjoy their existence greatly just in itself. It is one of the many things, but one of the bigger things that made the world of Monster Hunter World and Iceborne feel absolutely alive to me, and a lot of this was sort of lost in Rise and Sunbreak. I do love a lot of the things that they did, making Endemic Life more like tools that were actually fun to use during hunts, but the fact that they were tools made them feel less like living creatures, and I wish this system was sort of a mix between the old and the new one. The tools are great, but in exchange for that we lose out on all of the neat little creatures that you could find around the map. Sixth then, we have seasonal events. You could say this is event quests in general, as a lot of people seem to prefer the event quest style in Iceborne, but I sort of like the way that it's weekly in Rise and Sunbreak rather than being all in one big chunk. However, what I really appreciated in Iceborne more than anything else was the seasonal events, specifically the way that they would give us this massive change to the gathering hub. Everything would look unique, they'd get a nice little outfit for you that was unique to the season and it would match, and then everything just felt sort of tied together. The events would be meaningful, they'd give you cool things, and then you would just have to wait a couple of months for the next one. It was fun, and I think that we could do again with more seasonal events in the future. Even if we go with the weekly event quest system, which I am into, I love the idea of the gathering hub switching just aesthetics every couple of months. It's really cool. Seventh then, we have the characters and personalities of the villagers. Don't get me wrong, I love Kimura and Elgato and their cast of fun locales, but that's just sort of it. They're fun little flavor people. In World and Iceborne, pretty much all of the characters felt important. The story actually involved them in a greater scale than just giving you quests and living at the village, and more than that, it just sort of felt to me like they had more of a personality than the new ones. This of course isn't helped by the fact that Rise has a whole different set of NPCs than Sunbreak, with you switching to a whole new cast of characters in a new outpost, whereas Iceborne basically moved the majority of the same characters over from World to a new place and let them build upon themselves even further. This one is a bit hard to explain. I just think that all of the NPCs in both games were great, but I really think they nailed it specifically with the ones in Iceborne in comparison. Eighth up then, we have the RNG endgame system. In Iceborne, this was decorations. All of the decorations, and after hundreds of hours of gameplay, you could still go without getting an attack jewel, for example, which of course sucked because many Prime build required multiple of these. However, in a lot of ways, this was less annoying than the RNG of talismans in Rise and Sunbreak, the main reason being that a god charm in Sunbreak is not only way harder to get than the perfect deco was in Iceborne, but also because it is all or nothing. In Iceborne, you could get some of the decorations without getting all of the decorations, meaning while you were hunting on repeat to try and find things every once in a while, you'd get something that made you extremely happy, even if it didn't fully finish your journey of upgrading. In Sunbreak, you either get a god talisman or you don't. There isn't much middle ground. Sure, you can get a talisman that's pretty good, but again, the difference between a pretty good talisman and a perfect talisman is larger than the difference between having an attack deco and not having an attack deco. It is entirely build defining, rather than just being a minor inconvenience. That said, I've talked before about how little the difference really is between a good talisman and a god talisman as far as pure power. It is a few percentage points that doesn't really change the way the system feels as you are playing through it actively.
It's just a feeling.
Second to last then is sliding and jumping zones. There are less than a handful of zones in Sunbreak where you can slide, and sliding attacks have been removed for every weapon except for hammer, pretty much. Even jumping in zones has been significantly reduced. There's just way less ledges that you can use, and obviously this is in part due to the existence of silk binds, which provide a lot more verticality to the game in their own right, but something about zones in Sunbreak just feels very flat to me. For a game that has unparalleled verticality in all of the mountains that you can climb, you can get to pretty much anything you can see, but the zone
zones themselves that you fight the monsters in feel very flat. It's weird. In Iceborne, the zones had their own angular uniqueness. Little rocks jutting out, trees that had fallen over, little things that you could slide on, all manner of just natural parts of the environment that you could use to access different parts of your moveset. And while I can understand, absolutely, I get why this was mostly removed in Sunbreak, I still think it made the maps way more interesting to exist within while fighting monsters in Iceborne. The maps as a whole have a whole lot more ways that you can explore them in Sunbreak, but when you're actually fighting the monsters, you are stuck in the zone that the monster is in, and the zones themselves are a little bit more boring in my opinion. Then finally, the handler. Look, I know a lot of people have negative feelings towards the handler, whether you like it or not. She was an active part of our journey, almost like an extra hunting partner. She is outside of every camp, she cooks for you when you eat out in the field, and she was a major part of the story. Hinoa, Minoto, and Chiche are great in Rise and Sunbreak, but they are quest maidens, not a whole lot more. I don't mean that in a bad way either. Obviously, Hinoa and Minoto were part of the later story of Rise, but the handler herself felt like she was actually like a part of the team. You know what I mean? The quests weren't just random. They were specific things related to our hunter given to us by her, and it really added to the feeling that we weren't the only hunters in the world, that we were just on our own specific journey with our own specific handler, you know? And that's pretty much it. Of course, there are more differences between these two games and more things that you could argue are handled better, but these are the ones that really stick out in my brain when I think about it. The things that I truly appreciate and miss about Iceborne after my long journey through Sunbreak. All of this to say, every new Monster Hunter builds upon the feats of its predecessors, and I hope that the next Monster Hunter game is the best parts of Sunbreak and the best parts of Iceborne, and then some whole new amazing things on top of that as well, which is why this video exists, why I've gone out of my way to say the things that I thought were better before, because obviously Capcom experiments and messes with new things, but that doesn't mean that they need to stay that way for future titles either. What do you guys think? Do you agree with me that these things were done better in Iceborne? What other things do you feel this way in these games? What about the other way around? What was done better in Sunbreak than it was in Iceborne? Like if you like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.